thanks for coming down. It's pruning day. This is one of those fun classes. Who's new to Sunnyside classes? We got a couple new faces. Nice, welcome. I see some veterans here that we see quite a few too. So thanks for coming. This is one of those classes that freaks gardeners out. We can be honest. The pruning. Who's scared of pruning? To be honest, she's kind of like, just a little bit. We don't have to be scared of pruning. I mean, plants are pretty resilient creatures, but hopefully the point of this class is to kind of teach you the right timing and teach you some good techniques on maybe how to prune things properly here as we go through the winter. So you got pictures, we can look at those after class. So we'll do questions at the end. We'll kind of keep it flowing. This is one of those bonus classes each month. Everett Clinic, part of Optum, if you've been to a couple of the classes here online or this year, they sponsor a few classes. I don't get money. Sunnyside doesn't get money. This is about you guys. So I have 5 $50 gift cards that I'm going to pass out after the class, and I'm going to ask 5 hard questions. So if you pay attention, you'll answer the question right, you're going to get a $50 gift card to take home today too. So we'll do that right at the end. But it's always nice. Everett Clinic, a good local company, in my hometown, Everett, where I live, helps support the classes. So thanks to the clinic. We'll start by saying fall is not for pruning. Right now we got windstorms, we got power outages, we got a little bit of everything going on. I know we're still out of power at my place in Everett. Probably the one little zone it looks like down in the middle of town. But it's supposed to freeze really hard this week. Everybody kind of watches the weather, I hope, and sees that we're looking at some mid-20s, low 20s here starting Monday night, Tuesday night, Wednesday night. On a different subject, get your not hardy plants inside right away here today or tomorrow before it freezes to try to save them. But we don't want to do a lot of pruning until we have a good hard frost, sap has stopped flowing, and things are hardened off for the winter. So this isn't necessarily a class where I'm hoping you run home today, you can clip everything and prune your whole yard. This is kind of something to keep in mind here over the next 3 months, all the way towards late winter. I do this similar class again in January. We gear that a little bit more towards fruit trees and berries to kind of segregate that out, because that's a whole nother discussion, and that should be done later in the winter, not earlier. But could you walk out and do some of this in December, January, February? Pick your month. You can do it here anytime here as we go into the winter. Some things I'll specifically tell you don't do till the end of winter. We don't want to open up wood for damage on a hard night's frost. Some things I'll say hydrangea right off the top of my list. We don't want to do a whole lot to those here this time of year until we get into the first part of March in 2023. Okay, so I'm going to show you some tools, show you a little bit of plants. We'll look at some stuff. We'll work on a little tree I brought in here. I'll kind of show you a few things, kind of some basics. But just keep in mind, again, it's not about running home today and doing this. We're not going to prune. When I say broadleaf evergreen, does everyone know what I mean? Rhododendron, azalea, boxwood, anything keeps its leaves, not conifers or needle trees, but broadleaf trees. We're not touching any of that until we're after frost in spring. So if you haven't clipped your laurel, your boxwood, Japanese holly, all that stuff, I brought one in to show you. We will do that coming out of winter after the last frost in spring. That's the kind of stuff we talk about more in the summer pruning class in June, because we have from, say, early April till about midsummer, and then we got to walk away from pruning, because when it comes down to it, if we were to say what's the definition of pruning, anyone going to take a guess? I got my own definition, but I usually say I want to cut to encourage new growth in a different direction, make it bushier, whatever your purpose is. But when I cut, I'm always going to encourage new growth. We never want to do that going into winter, because we're going to get frosted a little bit. So that's why some of those things we wait for till the tail end or right coming out. Okay. The first thing I'll say, everyone's got the handout, it was on the chair. First thing I'll say is roses. Who's got roses? Everyone? Wow, nice. I got some too. So a typical rose, I'll mention a couple things. My rose schedule is always Veterans Day in November, which is next week, and then President's Weekend in February. So I try to tell people to go kind of hip high at Veterans Day and try to get more towards knee high President's Weekend. Is that making sense to everybody? So it's not, climbing rose, no, we're not going to do that with the climbing rose, because we waited years for it to get on top of our arbor or climb a trellis. We're just going to tidy those up a little bit. But at some point, I want to remove anything. To me, it's always kind of thinner than a pencil. I don't want anything left in February that's thinner than a pencil. You know, and we'll talk about this at the rose class in the spring as well. But for now, I would really focus on making sure it's cut down to a comfortable height about hip, where I'm not going to get broken from snow, from wind, like we've had the last couple days. Yes, it probably still has a couple flowers on it. Yes, you probably still have some leaves left on it right now. Mine does. Mine do in my yard. But we want to start it over one way or another. We do not want that old foliage going into 2023. And I don't want any flowers on it going into next year. We want to strip it, prune it, feed it in February, and then off we go for another season. Okay, so keep that in mind. We'll do questions here at the end. You got a quick one? Go ahead.
Well, when do you strip it?
I would wait till February. This to again in November. I want to get hip high so I'm comfortable for winter, and then I want to do this kind of one final time every February, and that gets me going for the season. So if we kind of go through the handout real quick, you know, if I just kind of do some basics, I brought my pruners in here, and I brought something nice and bright. Everyone can see yellow, I hope. So this is a piece of yellow twig dogwood, you know, nothing special, just a branch. But it's a good example to me. I can show you if I kind of look at plant structure. When I look at a twig dogwood, if we pass this around, this is what we would call an opposite bud type shrub or tree, all plants. Everything is in pairs up and down the stem, okay? If it was alternate bud, then maybe I've got buds on two sides, like rose would be an example, where I can kind of look at two directions, if that makes sense. So in basics, what I want to do with the twig dogwood being opposite, this could be an alternate bud, it wouldn't matter. But I always want to try to cut, not necessarily flat, if this is facing towards the sky. If I cut it flat off, just about ½ an inch above those buds, now I'm going to have great bud break in spring. I won't have a dead stub, right? We'll walk out, and if I leave, you know, if this is my bud right here and I cut it off there, is it going to kill the plant? No, but I'm going to look out next year, see healthy foliage breaking. I'm going to have a big dead black or gray chunk of wood, which I wouldn't want on my shrub. I'm kind of OCD, so we want to kind of go just above. Flat is not the best. The better way is cut it at 45, because now in our wet winter, especially with the rose, I'll tell you is one for sure, I don't have a flat surface for Mother Nature to keep wet day after day after day. Now the rain's going to kind of tend to run off, a little better chance to fight off some disease, blights, and things like that we might get into wood. Is that kind of making sense to everybody? So 45 degrees, you know, about ½ an inch above. I mean, I could do that at all these. What's going to happen if I cut too close? I'm right in the middle of the bud. What would happen with that? This won't grow, the next one will, and now I got even a bigger dead stub. And then we already looked at if I leave too much wood. So it's not that you got to get the measuring tape out and spend 2 days pruning one shrub. We're not going to get, but you just want to kind of keep it, you know, ½ an inch above the buds you want, and then off we go for next year, okay? This wouldn't be any different. You know, this is, again, an opposite bud shrub. If this was a rose or another alternate plant, the only difference is that maybe I look, if this is the center, I want my growth coming out right, left, and not going back across the middle, right? We don't want a crowded center. So now I'm just going to look for a bud on the outside. So when that breaks bud, it's going to continue the shape that I want it to grow, and not the inside that's going to go right in the center. That would be the only difference with those, okay? So use the, you know, if we kind of talk about how to make the cut here, and then we've got different types of pruning. You know, we're going into winter, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about pinching back things. You know, if we had annuals or herbs, you know, flowers, things like that, that's a little different story. We're not going to do a lot of shearing this time of year. I'll show you a good pair of hedge clippers, but we're going to talk a lot about thinning and heading back, and we will work on the maple towards the end. It'll kind of draw it all together. But when I say thinning, I'm just looking at a shrub. I'm not changing its natural growth habit. I'm looking at it and going, okay, it's way too crowded, congested, too much wood. I can dive into the middle and take some entire pieces out of the center. So if I had like this simple maple branch, typically we're not quite dormant yet, but you can see just a little Japanese maple branch I borrowed from my yard this morning. You know, if I'm thinning, I'm looking at pieces where you probably won't even know that I pruned. You know, I'm pulling little pieces out of the middle, and I'm opening up the structure. I want more sun, more air. I'm taking branches all the way out. Can you see kind of the difference of that? You know, if I really wanted to thin it, we take that one out, okay? I'm not leaving stubs. I'm not leaving, you know, pieces of wood out. I'm going all the way back to what I want to keep, and that's going to keep all my wood healthy and keep the shape I want going. I haven't changed the way this tree is going to grow. Flat, up, round, whatever your structure is you have, I haven't changed it. I've just opened it up for better air, better sun, healthier plant. This is what I do a lot in my yard. The other half of that is heading back. Now maybe, you know, here's my front door. We planted our tree a little bit too close, you know, just as a bad example. How do I stop it from going into there every day? Okay, now I'm gonna head it back. I'm gonna change the direction. If I take the tip out of that, I've said, I don't want you to grow that way anymore. I wanted you to branch and go a different direction. Or maybe I want to cut it to there. You can see that? No one's gonna get hit with any debris, right? So I changed my direction from going out this way. Now the energy of that plant's gonna go into that direction. So I can change it away. You can see if we kind of turn it this way. You know, maybe I'll take that off so you can see better. But now I've got, instead of that big long tip going out more and more and more, now I've thinned or headed that back so that now I've changed the direction that plant wants to grow. Does that make sense to everybody? Because that's a tough thing. I think a lot of people have the right intention. I think they try to do it right, and they're not terrible pruners by any means. I'm not trying to pick on anybody, but if you look at that and go, okay, what's going to happen before I press go on my thumb here and prune that? What's going to happen if I take that out? Do I want that to, no, I don't want to cut that branch. I'd rather shorten it up or thin it out and let it go a different direction, okay? So this could be maple, this could be any plant in your yard. I'll show you a few here as we go through class, but that's, I think, a good example to kind of explain thinning versus heading something back, okay? I'm gonna have a debris here. So we looked at that. If we, you know, to me, you know, this probably goes back for, you know, a couple generations in my family, all been gardeners. You know, my grandmother taught me, my parents taught me a lot, trying to teach my kids the same things. But there's not some rule that says it's winter time. You know, 30 years ago, my dad probably would have swore it's winter, I got to prune everything in the yard. You know, have a purpose. There's no reason that you have to prune everything in your landscape every season, but have a reason for it. You know, am I trying to get more flower, more fruit, more berry production? Is it blocking my view? Is the neighbor trying to sue me because she can't see the water anymore? You know, there's a lot of good reasons to go prune something back, but to me, the step one is kind of always have a purpose. You know, I like to keep things al natural. I don't want to butcher anything. I'm not a shearer. I don't make ice cubes or ovals or those kind of shapes. I mean, that's your thing. If you like to do that, that's fine. In my own yard, I like things natural, open, and airy. So I do a lot of thinning, not as much heading back. You may be, I like things down and tidy and a little more congested. Fine, you know, then you're gonna do probably a little bit more heading back. But I've made that decision, you know, that's the shape, that's the structure I kind of want to go with longer term, okay? A big one for me, because I'm not a huge spray guy, you know, and we can keep a lot of disease down naturally, and especially in our wet spring times, if I have sun and air circulation through a plant. So rose is the poster child. That's an easy one to keep open and airy so I don't fight the black spot mildew and other things during the growing season. But every plant would benefit from that. If you took just a minute on an old dogwood tree, a Japanese maple, any kind of plant in your yard, and don't look at the outline, you know, look at the center. Okay, I've got dead wood here, there. If I get in real quick in the winter and knock it all out of there, sometimes that fixes your problem right there. You're like, oh wow, this whole thing's just opened up. I don't have all that dead wood in the center. Everything's back to healthy, and I'm getting that air and that sun moving through, okay? But again, you don't have to go home and prune everything in your yard. That's always kind of, I say that 20 times in this class, because I'm hoping you don't go home and do it right now, but you know, pick and choose kind of wisely as we go through the winter. You know, look at some tools. I'm gonna say, you know, for me, I've got a lot of these same things in my yard. You know, you saw me pull my pruners out already. I've got the old Felco number 2s. You know, these are, Felco's a little on the spendy side. You know, if you're into the $80, $90 pruner, as long as you don't ever put them in the yard waste, at least they have a red handle so you can find them. You know, this might not be a good choice. This might be a great choice for me. I use these all day here at home. I volunteer a lot at the Arboretum in Everett, so I use these all the time. Keep them clean, keep them sharp. You know, I'm happy. You may be just as fine you know, we tend to carry a lot of Zenport pruners, excellent quality. You know, these I think are all $40 or $45. It's a great price. You know, if I put that up, you know, side by side, you're not going to probably be able to tell the difference with them, except for this has got the Felco stamp and probably would last a lifetime. You know, this one here, for a typical homeowner, I'm going to be good for years. You're not using this out and using it every day. So it's still a really good high quality pruner for less than half the price. So look at your options with a company like Zenport, because there's some good ones in there. We can get bigger, we can get smaller depending on your hands. The one I would mention in particular, see if I can break the seal here. That's stapled. You can see what's different with this. I've got a handle here, looks a little different than a typical pruner, right? If I put those side by side, you can see the difference on that. So what happens is with this is actually on a joint that rolls. So instead of me having to go like that, now your wrist is going to roll as you prune. And if you have, you know, carpal tunnel issues, something like that, this may be a good choice. I got my mom, you know, bless her heart's 82, works out in the yard all the time, retired. This is what I got her years ago, and this is a fabulous, good pruner, but it takes that tension off her wrist so much and she's not having to clamp down. Same idea with the ratchet. You know, this is a pretty good little high quality ratchet pruner. I mean, that's only 20 bucks. It's a great purchase. Christmas is coming, you can stuff in the stocking, right? But you got this, I got a clip hold, and this is one, instead of, again, having to go all the way down, I can go click, click, and then cut. I don't have to use all that force at one time. This is a pretty good set of ratchet. We play with quite a bit of them, and that's a pretty good high quality. So good hand pruners, one phase. I'm a huge pocket saw guy. You know, if you see me working in my yard on Wednesdays when I'm home, this is my #1 pruning device. My friend, he sits in my pocket all days I'm outside, because I can whip this out. That's all tape, so I don't want to break the seal. But I can whip this out, unfold it, and this is like a little surgical tool to me. I can get right into the crotch of a tree or a branch and get it cut out of there properly, not leaving a stub. Nice and clean, really easy to use. Fold it back up, put it in the pocket, use it again and again and again. And I've found some people really struggle with large loppers. You know, if I got a pair of loppers and I have to get into the middle of something, how can I ever get the right angle to get all that wood cut out the right direction? That saw fixes everything to me. I hardly ever use loppers I have in my garage anymore, unless I'm trying to get something up above me. I can use that saw and do the same thing I can with the lopper, much easier on the hand, the body, the shoulders especially, and I'm not having to, you know, try to crank in and sever something in the middle of a plant. So that's the large lopper. This is one I do use. They call these little mini vine loppers. Again, much smaller. They're great for old roses. That's what I use mine a lot on. But now I don't have to do this, much smaller scale, and I can get that into a little tighter spot a little bit easier. So the mini loppers is a great little way to go. A good head shear. This is the same exact pair I have in my house, in my garage, that I clip my little boxwood with. I got rid of my laurel hedge finally and opened up my backyard, so I don't have to do that anymore. But anything, you know, conifers, hedge material, you know, I like this because it's got a quick little finger lock and I can extend them up a little bit longer, you know, without having to do a whole lot of work. So that's a great head shear made by Zenport. You know, a little bit larger saw, I'm taking off limbs. You know, I have one of those in there as well, if it's a little bit bigger wood. And these are useful. You know, I'm a guy with huge hands, and I thought I would never ever need this in my garage, and now I probably use these more than I do of anything over the spring, summer, fall. Deadheading flowers, cutting little fine perennials back, little great, really high quality, made in USA from Dram. These are both really inexpensive, like 16 bucks for a really good forged mini pruner or mini snip. That's a great little tool to have around. Again, that's a great one for the Christmas stocking. And last, well, I got two things. Does anyone have a pole pruner?
Yeah.
Somebody else have a pole pruner? So we do a couple of them here. You know, this is a bigger purchase. This isn't something to kind of say, oh, I might use one of those. You know, if you're up there probably in the 15-foot range, you could get a pole pruner that you could do most everything yourself. Some people feel more comfortable hiring, you know, an arborist or a pruning service to come get things that are a little bit up. But a good pole pruner, if you get used to using it properly, you can do some really good pruning on those by yourself. We try to get two, you know, kind of a lighter shorter one. This Fisker's model is excellent. That's about $100. You know, that we can use that and get up about 12 feet. It's got a pretty easy way to clip, snip. We've got a rope pull. I can put a saw on it. You know, if I want to get up, I'm not going to cut the rafters here, but if I want to get up and saw something up in a small tree, that's a pretty easy little one to use. This is the one I use here. This is kind of more of a professional model. I've had mine now for probably 9 years, and I got sick of replacing the small one because I use it all the time. This is one you'll never replace. So this is a little higher end one. I think it's about 200 bucks. But this is 14 feet up. The difference with this is chain. I don't have any rope to disintegrate. It's much stronger. I've got some serious leverage, you know, that I can extend this pole up. I would be way outside of this roof right here, and I can, again, lay that up in a tree. I can saw, I can pull my chain lock down and do some lopping of branches up there. Again, I want to clean out my flowering cherry, my plum, my dogwood, whatever it is. A pole pruner is a pretty useful little device to have around in the garage. With the discount today, that's save you some cash on those two big ones too. And lastly, sharpener. So this is, I'm hoping everybody here takes one home this week, because I think this is one of the best things we carry. Has everyone had one of these yet? We got a couple of them that have been here before. I think this is a fabulous little cheap thing. We're about 15 bucks. At the discount today, I get it for 12. But my wife stole my first one. It's in the kitchen now because this works for everything sharpening. I got my own in the garage because I hid it from her. Now I keep my own one in there. So if I've got lopper, shear, knife, any kind of device at all, and I want to sharpen it, this is the easiest thing when I'm out working, just to grab my sharpener and just run it on the blade real quick. It cleans it, it sharpens it up, and then off we go for another pruning session. I mean, they're really easy to use. I like this too, because if you take care of your equipment, you're going to put a little bit of oil on them on occasion. I've got a spot in here where I can do a little bit of 3-in-1 or mineral oil. I can screw that capless, and I've got a little thing where I can be out there and I can brush my pruners and make sure they're lubricated, especially when we're out pruning in this rain here this winter, because that'll keep the water out of it, keep it from rusting, keep the pruners happy. Now, somebody always inevitably asks me, well, is this all you do to sharpen? 99% of the time these days, that does the job for anything for me. I usually, one time in the winter, will go, okay, I haven't messed with those for a while. We're going to give you a clean job. And yes, I will take it apart, get my grinder out, especially maybe on a larger lopper or shear, and I might grind the blade a little bit in the winter time when I'm not out using it as much, and then put it back together and I'm ready to go for spring, you know, kind of thing. But hand pruners, little simple things like that, that's the way to go. And that's a really easy tool to have around. And again, I like the bright handle because then I don't leave it in my yard waste like I usually do with my trowels and things. So there we go. All right, the other one in there is truly a pocket sharpener, and this is a little less expensive one, about 10 bucks. And I've got tungsten carbide and ceramic blade, and the same thing, I can just rub that on the side of my pruner and be done with it. This is another one I use a little bit at my place as well, okay? So good sharpener, keep them sharp. You're gonna make your life easy. You got dull pruners, you're gonna mash branches, and you're gonna be disappointed with how it looks, because it'll mash your branches if we got dull pruners, all right? So a couple quick rules, and we'll do some plants here. You know, knowing the plants in your landscape, I think, is a big part of this. So if we, you know, if we kind of talk about this year, we had a super drought summer. Some things might have went dormant a little bit early. I know in my yard we had fall color probably before we had supposed to have fall color, if we didn't water quite enough. It's not the end of the world. But those plants are always kind of preserve themselves and then be ready to go for the coming gardening season. So watch what happened this summer. Did I have some burn? Do I have some dieback? Did I fight disease on something? Those are all things to kind of keep in the gardening brain over the winter, so that when I'm out there pruning, you know, midwinter towards spring, how can I correct that problem? We want to clean up bad foliage, get it out of there. Do I consider a dormant spray? Do I prune it to open it up a little bit? You know, those are all things that we can work on, you know, towards that tail end of winter that will help us out come spring and eliminate some of those problems for sure, okay? My two big rules are the next two on the sheet there. Number 3, prune after bloom is a rule I think you can never live by. So remember that, my rule, prune after bloom. If I have a plant, you're wondering, when should I probably prune that thing? You know, think of the rhododendron. When's your rhodi bloom? Spring. So when's the best time to prune it? after it's done flowering. I can do whatever I want. I grow up with new growth. I set a flower bud, then I get to enjoy that flower again the next season. Okay, does that make sense? So like if we think of that as a rule, you know, part of that is the difference between plants that bloom on old wood or plants that bloom on new wood. So rhododendron is a great example of something that blooms on old wood. What's a good example of one that blooms on new wood? Any guesses?
Spirea.
Spirea is a great choice. Rose would be one. Think of a rose bush. I prune it back in February. All the growth comes up. I immediately get a flower. If that was an old wood bloomer and we cut it back too hard in the winter, I got no flower the next year. Think of your lilac. You know, what's going to happen if I walk home today and say, more of my lilac's 15 feet. I want to get that thing down a little bit. It's not going to hurt the plant, but all of my flower buds are sitting there right now on the tips of those limbs that I'll get to enjoy next May when I'm out working and smelling them in my yard. If I cut it hard in the winter, I cut off my flower buds. It's an old wood blooming plant, and then I have to wait another season for flower, okay? So kind of keep that in mind. I think prune after bloom, you know, is the rule that's going to get you near 100% of the time. You can't go wrong if you think of that. It's done blooming, sweet. If we're going to, if we need to prune it, let's do it now, you know, and then off we go, okay? The other one for me is the 1/3 rule. Now, I'll raise both my hands. I break that all the time. I'm sure if you were honest, you'd probably say, yes, I have broke the 1/3 rule. But, you know, if I've got a plant, whether it's height or spread, I can go down 1/3 and be safe. You know, I can go 1/3 this way and be safe most of the time. That's going to be with a lot of deciduous plants, not necessarily evergreen things, okay? But 1/3 rules are pretty good generalization to say, yeah, you know, have I ever walked out to an old yard and said that rhodey's got to start over and taken it from 12 feet down to 2 feet and then watched it recover? Absolutely. There's some plants we can get away with that from, but not all of them. The biggest thing with me to remind you is we get into next spring and now we're going to look at attacking broadleaf evergreens, conifers, other plants in our yard. I cannot cut to bare wood, so 1/3 is not going to cut it. It's probably more like 10-20%. If I cut a plant like a boxwood into where I have no leaves, chances are I'm not going to get more growth out of that. So I have to stay out where I have foliage or needles to start with. Is that making sense to everybody? So deciduous, yes, I can do what I want, but evergreen things I want to be a little bit more careful of. You know, a big one with all my classes is that last one there. I mean, you get the right plant in the right place. You know, who wants to do more work in their yard? I'm not going to raise my hand. I like working in my yard, but I don't want to do more, right? So if I put the wrong plant in the wrong place, what's going to happen? I'm going to make myself more work. I got to cut it every single year. I got to cut it twice a year. I can't believe I put that by my front porch because no one can get into my door. My mailman can't leave the letters in the box because it covers it in a month. So get the right plant in the right place and the right scale, and we're not going to have to do as much of this long term as well, okay? Now some things, again, I'm not talking about running home and doing this today because I'm not doing anything yet in my place yet either, but as we progress here after frost, Thanksgiving, Christmas, January into February, you know, what are some things we want to kind of work on here in the winter? And I'm going to show you a few plants here to kind of give you some ideas, all right? So two things we're going to start with. Who has lavender? Who has heather? We've probably got some with both, right? I have both. So these are two totally misinterpreted plants, if you ask me. You know, they're not telling you to cut me back now. They're not telling me to do this right this time of year. But what I hear from a lot of customers in my 30 years doing this, these are two of the biggest complaints. You know, I bought lavender, I can't stand it. It got all woody and it's top heavy. I bought heather. I got a donut, you know, big brown dead center and a bunch of little frosting of flowers on the outside, right? These are two indestructible plants that every gardener should utilize in those hot, sunny, no maintenance areas. They're both great choices, but they don't get pruned right. Both perfect examples of that prune after bloom. I have heather. This has got about 1 billion flower buds on it. They're gonna keep my pollinators happy here over the winter, give me some color. When I come out of winter, I got to cut this back a little bit. I'm not cutting it to 1/3. I'm not cutting it to the ground, but I'm going to take my shears and I'm going to just lightly cut this back below where my flowers are dried, right? Because now I'm going to have that super dense, compact carpet of heather without the woody center on it. Otherwise, what happens? You know, this blooms, then it grows out, and then it grows out, and then it grows out, and 5 years later you're like, well, what happened? I got all this wood in the middle and I got all these flower stalks coming out, right? But if we shear it, you'll be like the magazines where you see those heather gardens that are just carpets that are covered with flowers. That's the trick to heather, if you ask me. So winter, these are fall, winter, spring bloomers. You know, they're done by March, April. We go prune those right then, off we go for another season. Lavender, exactly the same thing. This should always, to me, be cut back coming out of winter. You know, if I don't cut lavender back, who's got lavender with dead wood about that far out of the ground? Then I got a little frosting of gray foliage up there. It's nothing wrong with it. It still blooms, it still grows. But if I want squim, or if you're not from here, we say sequim, right? if we want squim lavender farm, you know, I want a big, thick pin cushion. I want to harvest some oil. I want flowers to cut. That's what they're doing, is shearing this time and time again. Shear it coming out of winter, let it bloom. Blooms are dried, or I harvest them, I shear it again. I mean, you might go through 2, 3 really quick little prunings on lavender a year to keep your plants nice and tight, low to the ground, and blooming to their maximum potential, okay? So there's 2 that I kind of always start with, because these are usually the 2 I hear in other classes like, ugh, heather, I don't want one of those. I tried that, it turned into a donut. But if we prune it, really easy to keep looking nice, because both those are drought tolerant and very minimal maintenance plants. I mean, I think that every gardener should have those in those curbside, sunny hills, those areas where we don't want to mess with much, okay? Same with grasses real quick. So we got 2 kinds of grasses in the world out here. I'll pick that one instead of that one. So we have 2 grasses, right? We got evergreen grasses. Maybe I got, like me, I have this in my pots right now. I like orange and lime. And I have grasses that are about to turn color and turn to mush here for the winter, right? Perennial type grasses. So this isn't, again, this is an evergreen, so what's your guess? When am I gonna probably prune that? Not this time of the year. I'm not gonna cut grasses that are evergreen back. This would be like my shrub. So I'm gonna walk out like 1st of April. I would do this if I had hair. You know, we would pick this up, get a nice clump, and we would chop this off about 4 or 6 inches above the ground. And now we're telling you, you're done, start over from scratch. So this isn't something I do every year by any means, probably every 3 years in my yard. Okay, that's enough. Let's get you cut back and let you start over again. We put a little food on it in April, we cut it back, off we go for another season. I got a brand new grass, okay? I can divide it, do all that stuff then too if I wanted. You know, cutting an evergreen grass, oh look, I have little brown tips, I'll just prune them, is gonna solve none of your problem. You're just gonna have another brown tip as we cut it back. So if we're really gonna start this over, saw that thing off at the end of winter, coming after frost, and let it start over again. These guys, you know, hopefully you're not doing it yet because we're about to enjoy some nice fall color. That one's just starting to turn pinky red. But I use a lot of grasses in my landscape. Tall, short, like Japanese forest grass. These are all gonna go dormant. You know, they're gonna turn color. They probably have plumes out right now, and we're gonna start brand new for next year. So I don't care if you're OCD like me, you probably go out at Thanksgiving to Christmas. I cut it all back, clean it all up, get it in the yard away, sweet, I'll see you next spring. It doesn't matter if you do it then or clean it up in February, early March, but I have to get this cleaned up before it starts over again next year. So usually if you wrote down maybe March 1st or so on your calendar, I can rejuvenate that grass for the season. This one, maybe not as important because typically these are gonna fall to the ground, turn to mulch, and it'll find a way to start over. But if I have a tall grass, which I have a bunch of, that's dormant in the winter, if I don't cut it off a couple inches above the soil and let it start over again, what's gonna happen in April? Here comes new growth. Now I'm gonna have my old dead brown grass with green mixed with it, and I'm never gonna be able to get in there and get kind of good pruning done, okay? So Sawzall, hoppers, whatever you want, it's an easy thing to kind of bust off at the end of winter if you haven't gotten to it, or like I said, get it cleaned up here Thanksgiving, Christmas time, and then off you go. One less project for spring, okay? So we're good on grasses. Now I'm going to show you a couple branches. We're going to talk hydrangeas for a minute. Who's got hydrangeas? Hopefully everybody. Hydrangeas is one of my faves. So the best shrub for sun or shade for all season bloom. I mean, roses and hydrangeas are the 2 that I'm going to have 6-7 months of color out of, you know, during the growing season. So if I look at, first we'll do, anyone know PG hydrangea? Okay, this one's for sun. Okay, and this kind of ties together. We'll see what you've learned so far. So we talked about prune after bloom, right? And we talked about some plants. Here, I'll make him go dormant here. We'll take his leaves off. There you go. So we're in the winter here. It's another few weeks. We had frost. Now I'm left with what? Dried flower and bare wood. What do I want to do with this here going into winter? I want to make sure this doesn't get so heavy, wet, wind, and snap and crack my plant. So all I want to do here in the fall is walk out and snip I want to deadhead my hydrangeas. I want the blooms gone. I'm going to leave that wood alone, and I'm walking away. I'm going to go out to March, 1st of March. Then I'm going to say, okay, I don't want you here. I want you here. I'm going to pick my height. I'm going to do my thinning, clean it up, and off we go for another season. Now this is, I think hydrangea is a great example to kind of, if you look at that list, we talked about prune after bloom. We're done blooming in the summer. We'll get you started next year again. And B, does it bloom on old wood or new wood? Does anyone know what kind of wood PG hydrangea grows on?
1 year growth.
New wood. So I could do whatever I want to this. I could, okay, I want my hydrangea 8 feet tall. Sweet. Just deadhead it and walk away. If I cut one off, now I got 2 shoots come out and I got 2 blooms for the price of 1 next year, okay? If I don't want it as high, I could cut down above any one of these pairs of buds all the way down the plant, and it would just start out lower, still give me the same flowering. It's not going to change the bloom, but now I've got a little bit smaller compact plant. Okay, so there's your choice as a gardener. A, what variety did I choose so it would stay the right size for my own garden, and B, how do I want to prune it? It's going to tell you how high it'll get. Okay, so that's a PG is a new wood bloomer. That's much different than we talk about mop head hydrangeas, big brown blue flowers, right, in the shade or part sun, big lace cap flowers. That we have to know your variety. This is where we might get our first confusion of the day. So depending on the hydrangea you have, you know, back, say, if we go back 20 years, say we'll call it 2000, everything that existed before that was old wood bloom. So if I have an old hydrangea like this, and I cut it way back, I'm not going to kill my plant, I'm not going to hurt it, but that next year you're not going to see very many flowers come out. Does that make sense to everybody? Now, these new generation hydrangeas bloom on both old and new wood. So we carry now, you know, 95% of the hydrangeas we carry are no-brainer pruning hydrangeas. I can cut it back if I want, I can leave it alone if I want. You want a big plant? Sweet, just deadhead it. You know, same thing as that PG. I'm going to walk out in the fall, take that flower off so that I don't have to worry about it breaking or swaying in the wind. We'll see you next year. You know, off comes 2 for the price of 1, and there we go again for another season. If I have an old-fashioned hydrangea, like maybe Nico Blue is one a lot of people recognize the name, I can't cut back more than 1 or 2 buds. If I go down to here, or fall the stem down, it's going to grow. It's not going to kill my plant, but I'm not going to get flower next year because you have to leave that 1-year-old wood for the old wood bloomers. Does that make sense? Because that's a tough one with hydrangeas. If you're not sure, yeah, you could bring me a picture, tell me what it looks like, and maybe I can guess, but there are so many hydrangeas. I would suggest this. If you don't know, prune it, see what happens. It's not going to hurt your plant. That one summer, you're like, okay, I did what Trevor said. I cut my hydrangea back. It came up, grew nicely. I had a beautiful compact plant, but man, I didn't get very many flowers on that thing this summer. Okay, now I know going forward, I have to leave some of that old wood to get the flower on it, okay? You know, again, I think there's places for both in a typical yard up here, but old-fashioned hydrangeas, you know, if I'm not gonna cut it back, excuse me, I'm gonna need a, you know, 6-7 foot circle and a 7-8 foot height. I mean, it's a magnificent shrub specimen, an old-fashioned hydrangea. If you want it in a pot, you want it in a nice little shady corner of the yard, and I don't want anything over my waist, don't buy old-fashioned ones. There's so many great new ones that you just don't have to do the work on, and they stay much smaller, okay, without having to prune. So there's hydrangeas. I'm gonna make a mess up here today. Let's do a few more. In fact, here, I brought up a big, you know, this is we don't have a lot of hydrangeas left still, but we got a few. So I brought that up. You know, that's one, when I bought that in last April, That's how tall it was. You know, had a little bit of dead wood at the bottom with no leaves on it. And look what it became in one season. And I got flowers on it. So what does that mean? Nobody. New wood bloomer. That's going to get me bloom right away, okay? So what am I going to do here if I have this outside my yard? When it freezes next week, what happens to hydrangea foliage? It kind of turns yellow and it kind of melts like snot, right? It gets laid. You just kind of scrape it off the ground and throw it in the yard waste. Am I going to do any pruning next week when this is frosted? Just the bloom. I want to make sure, because if I cut this back, can you see how green these stems are? That's not hardened off even yet, and I might end up losing some of this wood if I cut it back. So all I'm going to do is walk around and say, ooh, I see a dried flower. I see a dried flower. Sweet. Turn to snot, melt away, clean him up. He's going to sit there for the winter. March, I'm going to walk out and go, okay, you got this big. I don't mind if you get a little taller. All right, leave it alone. Okay, I want to make sure you don't kind of grow too tall every year. Sweet. Then I go in here and I just start, boy, this one's going to struggle because I'm cutting it now, right? And I'm going to cut those down halfway or all the way to the last bud. I can pick wherever height I want, and that'll start it lower and still give me flower next year, okay? So let's get the hydrangea out. Now I don't have to prune the whole thing up to class, right? So let's just do this real quick. So a couple of evergreen things. Now I brought this in just as an example. You know, anyone know what this guy is? Japanese holly. Little evergreen, great little boxwood substitute. I can leave it natural. I can clip this into a hedge. I can do whatever I like to it. But this is just an example of the other half of plants. Being evergreen, what am I going to do? Wait till spring. I'm not going to cut this time of year. But if I coming out of winter, I didn't get to it this year, it's not the end of the world, I could do whatever I want to this. I could shear it, I could spend an hour, you know, pulling little pieces out like, oh, I'm kind of like this, I'm just going to sit here and do this for an hour and pull pieces out. Or I could grab my hedge clippers and make a hedge out of it, round it off, do whatever your taste is for pruning it. The difference between this and if you look at that hydrangea is what? You know, I've got a stem here, you know, with all kinds of buds, right? Every single place a leaf is coming out is another bud. So this isn't my hydrangea where I've got a bud there, a bud here, a bud here, a bud there, and I've got to be a little more particular where I cut, right? So I don't have dead wood, I don't have stubs. I could shear this anywhere and it's going to regrow, get bushier, get thicker, and I'm going to have a more attractive plant. So this could be laurel, it could be boxwood, it could be anything evergreen. If you look at the stem structure, you're going to see I have more options. I maybe don't have to be as particular on where I prune, but I can do this coming out of winter and I'll have a happy plant again, okay?
Can I ask you a question?
Yeah.
So I had some in my yard and they're 5 years old.
Okay.
And late summer, they just went crazy.
Yeah.
Really jumped.
Yep.
And so
So if typical holly, you might have a long strand of growth that shot out. So come out of winter, take those all the way back and just leave a little 4-6 inch piece. Now that'll side branch and you'll start to get thicker and bushier again.
So I did it last week because I really got fed up with it.
Yeah, and it's, again, I said don't ever do it in the fall. It's not like you're not going to kill your plant. I don't want you to freak out. But what's going to, the issue with this fall pruning is, you know, say we get these 3 days of cold here this week, and then all of a sudden it's like, oh wow, we got a couple weeks of decent weather, the sun's out a little bit, it's a little warmer. That plant may start to want to regrow where you cut it, and then that's going to get frosted at some point. So now in spring, you're just going to have to go back and check it a little bit and make sure that we don't have any dead wood. Okay? Yeah, really easy. Let's see what else did I bring in here. Conifers. Let's get all the evergreens done here. So if we talk conifers, you know, needly creatures, I had conifer class here a couple weeks ago, but in the entire world, there's really only 2 kinds of evergreens or needle type trees. You know, we got all kinds of spruce and pine and fir and all the rest of it, but they only get pruned in 2 separate ways. So if we think of, let's do our Christmas tree, comes into the house, what do we got? You know, we bring our noble fir in or whatever kind of Christmas tree we like. We have a central trunk, right? And we have rings of branches, or what they call whorls. This is called a whorl type conifer, W-H-O-R-L. So this is one, think your Christmas tree. Yes, I can shear them, the Christmas tree growers. That's how they get them nice and bushy. But I've got a central evergreen trunk, and I've got rings of branches as they grow. You know, fuller skirt, then usually a little narrower up towards top, right? So if I'm going to prune something like this, you know, yeah, I go out here and borrow evergreens all here for the next month for Christmas wreaths. You know, we do a bunch of wreaths here. I'm not going to hurt my tree by doing this here in the winter, but the things that you typically would want to do this in spring. You know, I'd be out there April, May. If you know pine trees, I get what? A new candle comes out. I can cut that in half. I can pinch it off if I want to keep it a little smaller, right? And then I could keep it down. The problem with conifers, you can see bare wood. So if I grow another year and then I want to go back to this, not going to happen. You know, I can't go, oh, you're too much. I'm going to prune you off and shorten you up. If I cut that stub off below needles, it's a stub for all eternity. I might as well walk in and just take it off the trunk. Does that make sense? It's not going to regrow. I'm not going to get new needles. And that's going to be on world conifers, pine, spruce, true firs, not Douglas firs, a little different creature, but true firs like noble fir, Shasta fir, you know, Nordman fir. There's a bunch of native firs around here would grow like that. Plants like hemlock, yews, juniper, arborvitae. Who's got an arborvitae hedge? I got one too. I thought I'd never have one, but I ended up doing one because it's the perfect green fence, right? You know, this is a yew as an example. What's the difference? Kind of like our broadleafed evergreen, I could look on here on this one little piece of wood. I can count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. There's about 18 buds on that single piece. So again, I could shear this probably a little easier. And again, as long as I don't let it go for 5 years and have bare wood and try to go back to that point, I'm gonna have much better luck with the random type conifer, keeping it bushier and fuller in the yard, okay? So better hedge, you know, as an example. To me, a world conifer is your stately specimen. You know, I want a nice big tree, we don't top it. We want that growing as a focal point. This is the kind of stuff I could shear, I can make a little hedge, I can put it on my foundation, I can do a lot of stuff. You know, think juniper. Who's got juniper? Nobody likes juniper anymore. Juniper's a great drought tolerant one for sun. There's better junipers than those old ratty 1975 tams, right? So juniper is another example. I mean, that's a great drought tolerant conifer, nice and thick, covers areas, keeps weeds down. I could shear that however I want as long as I don't cut into bare wood. I'll have a nicer, thicker plant, okay? Get you a couple more here. So what else? Just as an example, oh, here's one we gotta do. So everybody around here knows I have Acer palmatum itis. That is the addiction to all things Japanese maple, right? This one got extra wet last night. Now, does anyone kind of recognize the shape of this? The windstorm was kind enough to make it dormant for me here yesterday, so it has no leaves left. But this is a lace leaf maple. Who's got lace leaf maples in their yard? I think everybody ends up with a lace leaf at some point. So this is the one thing I'm gonna tell you right now, you have to get done in the winter. You know, I can go out in the summer, prune an upright maple. I can do some work other times of the year, but when this is full of foliage, what do I have? A big thick mushroom. I can't see anything in the middle of that plant. It's not gonna turn out so well if you've got to do your cutting back of your lace leaf during the growing season. So in the winter time, you know, again, I'm probably more out after Christmas for me, you know, January, February, and I'll climb underneath my old lace leaves to go, okay, let's get all the dead wood out of there. That's an easy thing to do for most people. Snap all, you don't need pruners. You know, if I can find a piece, here's a little piece right there. Gray, not disease, it's not dying, there's nothing wrong with it, but I can get all that little old wood out of there, throw it away, and then you stand back and you're probably like, oh wow, I got a brand new plant. It's not so congested and crossed over everywhere. If I try to do that in the summer, it's gonna be nearly impossible. So clean out the dead wood and then look at the perimeter. You know, I have no problem going through. Again, maple's one that has opposite buds. I don't want this probably hanging off that far. We would agree with that. So I'll pick one of these, say, okay, that's enough. You know, that's enough. I want you up off the ground a little bit. Now I get rebranching and I get a fuller, nicer plant for the character I want. You know, these are almost, you know, a personal taste thing. I see some people that like them more flowing onto the ground. You know, I like mine up and cascading down so I can see the structure a little bit better, but you can do these either way. The point of me bringing this in though, is this is one I try to get people, you've got to get out sometime this winter. I don't care if it's late winter, before it breaks bud in spring, get your dead wood cleaned out of there and do your pruning, then you're good to go for the season. If yours is like mine, You know, I've got one 20 years that I rescued in my front yard, and it's been the same size now for about 15 years because every year I'm not going to dig up more lawn or move another plant because it's getting so big. But if I can cut it back properly and just let it kind of regrow itself each season, I've got the same plant essentially forever in there. I don't want it hanging on my grass. You know, the lawnmower is not a good pruning device, I'll tell you right now. Or the weed whacker, we don't want to get it with that. But if we have it on the grass, we can really easily pick some pieces up and cut those either off. You know, to me, down the road, this is probably all off this tree entirely, you know, at some point, because by then, all this is growing out and replace my crown. This is going to be hanging on the compost at the soil. So we're going to cut those off as it gets older because this has replaced it, okay? Is that kind of helping everybody with lace leaf? Because that's a tough one to do in the summertime. As we get towards late winter, you know, we talked about a lot of things that bloom, you know, on old wood. So anyone recognize that? It almost got dormant, but this is a little lilac. You know, I've got 15-foot lilacs in my yard. But the point of me bringing this in is, what do I have right now on the top of these stems? That's my flower bud that I get to cut, smell, and enjoy next May. So I'm not going to go out this winter and cut this back. Again, I'm not going to hurt my plant, but I'm going to cut off the majority of my flowers. So I'm going to let this bloom next May, June. Sweet, now I can cut it back and take some wood and do what I want because it'll regrow, set its flower bud, and then I have the enjoy for 2024 at that point. Does that make sense? So this could be, you know, lilacs. Maybe some of you have forsythia. Who's got forsythia? You know, blooms of yellow. That's a perfect example. It just kills me. I got a neighbor in my neighborhood that's got a beautiful forsythia, and she walks out every December and cuts it off of the ground. I'm like, well, why do you want forsythia? Because she's never seen a flower in the 20 years I've been there because she cuts off all the wood. And then it grows up and does its thing every year. It doesn't hurt the plant. But if we let that bloom, all that beautiful yellow flower, and then cut it to the ground if you want. Now we come again, we have wood again for the next season to bloom. That could be quince, you know, a lot of the early blooming flowering currants, you know, a lot of early blooming shrubs. Those are the ones we don't want to do here coming in wintertime, okay? So if we look at the other end of that, she mentioned spirea. You know, rose was another example. There's a lot of these cool shrubs that bloom on new wood. So do what you want with them. You know, this is a plant. Anyone have these cool new hypericums? So they call these floral berries. They bloom yellow in the summer. Then I get these beautiful berries that I can cut and use for arrangements in the fall. You know, get the big floral industry thing right now. So this is a plant that blooms on new wood. So if you saw my grower, you'd probably screech. You know, when they come in, he's like, "Ooh, what did you do to that thing? It looks beautiful, bushy, nice and healthy." They'll go in and just whack this wood off about 4 inches out of the pot and walk away. And then next spring, up it comes and grows. And by the time he sends me the fresh crop, you know, next May or June, it's a beautiful bushy plant again that blooms, gets berries, and we don't skip a beat, okay? So spirea is one that I use a lot in my yard as well. And that's one that, again, will shear back whatever you want to do. I mean, right now, maybe to make you feel more comfortable pruning, you know, I got a beautiful spirea I've had for years in my front rockery, and in bloom, it's about this big. You know, it's a nice size 3-4 foot shrub covered in flowers. So guess how big it is in February? Like that tall. So it gets cut off. I leave a little mound of twigs because up it comes in the spring, up it come with colorful foliage, we get flowers, and off we go another season. So I wanted it compact. If I didn't prune it, I would probably have a spirea that's larger than me by now, which again, may be the way you want it in your yard, that's fine, but you have that option of really cutting them back if you like. Yes?
So with spirea, because I really like that, and I
Yeah.
have several, and I've learned the hard way on these things. Wait till December to do it, or do it now if I'm gonna...
Well, I mean, again, we're getting a frost this week. You could do it now. It's not gonna, you're never gonna hurt spirea, I'll be honest with you, with any kind of cold. You know, I typically am out there, you know, like Valentine's Day, you know, towards the end of winter, sometime in February. It's like, okay, it's your turn. We get it cut back, put it in the yard waste. I'll see you here in a few weeks, and then I'm done for the year. You know, off we go.
Do I wait for a hard frost and then do it?
Yeah, always wait for a frost before we do any fall pruning, but that's one you could do it anytime over the winter. It's not gonna hurt the plant.
Okay, but
Yeah.
wait for that
Yeah,
frost.
yeah, wait, you're gonna get it this week. It's gonna come this week, okay? That's probably, you know what, let's just do one more here at the end, because I thought this might be kind of fun. Then we'll take some questions. So this is where I'll see if I can poke myself in the eye. Hopefully not take down the roof. So this is just a typical Japanese maple. I mean, I have, you know, ones 20 foot in my yard. I'm sure you guys have bigger ones as well. But if I look at this tree, I'd be even better looking at it the other way. You know, what do you see? Is there anything necessarily wrong with it? You know, not really. Do I need to do all this? I'm kind of OCD pruner, so yeah, this one's been driving me crazy. I saved it for this class. But, you know, again, I'm not interested in heading this back, you know, cutting it into a little ball and making it a little mound or whatever you want to call it. I want to thin this thing out. You know, I want branches that don't cross. I want a clean center. I want the structure that I want, especially when it's young. So if you just watch me kind of prune here for a minute, what am I going to do? I'm looking in the inside of this thing, and I'm saying any pieces that are kind of going across each other, crowding, or going back to the center are coming out. You know, I want to open this whole plant up. You see me I'll do this one pretty quick. We'll do it here in a minute, and then you can see the difference. So I'm just walking around. I'm not, again, I can always go back and head something back if I'm like, ooh, that's a little bit uneven, and do that later. But I really want to thin this out so that it's got the air and the sun that it needs. So we're going to get in here in the middle and do the worst ones are right in here. Can you see? You kind of see in here at the trunk. What do I got going? You know, I got pieces going up like that. I got this piece crossed all the way across. Can everyone see that one there? Crossed all. Look at the difference in just that one piece is the one that was driving me crazy for the last couple weeks. But if I get in there and do I mean, I spent 5 minutes, especially when you come buy one and a new one. If you can do this when they're young and kind of set the structure, you're going to have a lot less work down the road. I mean, you see the difference at the bottom there already? You know, I've got air, I've got sun, it's moving in a good direction. I'm trying not to get too OCD here and spend an hour, but we'll get it done here real quick. You know, here's another one. Do I need that thing? No. It's going right up through the center of the other one. You know, down the road, what's going to happen to this top? You know, I've kind of got that vase shape, which is what we want, but I got to make sure we've got room for these to grow. So I'm going to pull that one out, okay? I'm going to get rid of some of these side branches in here that are crowding themselves. This one's going to go. See, and I've got some room now. You know, maybe this goes vase shape. The decision that I knew that was going to come to this is, do I keep, did everyone see this one? Yeah. You know, do I keep that or not? Because you can see I'm going to have to make a choice. So we're going to bite the bullet and go sweet. Now I've got some room. Get that one out of there. Got one more crossing there. Look at that. That looks like a new tree here in about 5 minutes. So can you see the difference? I didn't head anything back. I'm not butchering. I'm not changing the structure of it at all. I'm digging into the middle first, and then I can always stand back and go, okay, you're a little bit longer here at the back. Let's just head you back just a little bit. Okay, and okay, now I'm about the same size, you know, if you want to really get crazy for the height and the spread kind of thing. But now I can walk around this and go, okay, I've got years for this to grow into the shape I want. And again, by doing this now, I'm not going to have as much pruning down the road because I cleaned that wood out. You'll see maples and all trees really, you know, what happens in the middle? You know, it doesn't get any sun, it gets tired, the growth gets a little old. You know, so what happens? You know, that wood turns gray, it naturally dies off. Doesn't mean we have a disease, you know, or something going wrong necessarily. I just get it out of there now because I can tell you every single piece I pulled off of there in the middle, if I went out and saw that tree in a year or two, it's going to be dead wood anyway. So let's just get it out of there, let it heal itself up, you know, and off we go. Okay? So that's a little, help you a little bit with the thinning and heading. Yeah, hopefully get a little bit. Okay, so let's do this. Now the last thing I'll mention is dormant spray. So the class discount, like we always do for you guys, take the time to come down. You know, pruning is one that you obviously care about your yard if you're coming out here to learn a little bit. So hopefully we got you a few tips today. But you can have, you got 20% on any of the tools and stuff I brought in here. You just tell them at the class, I want that sharpener, give me the lopper, I need a new pair of pruners, I'm buying some for Christmas. You know, whatever, they'll get you 20% off on all that. And the dormant spray. You know, and I always bring this in at this class, and we'll talk about this quite a bit in January at a couple classes. You know, I'm not trying to sell you this to make extra money for Sunnyside, or that you have to use this on everything in your yard, but I would just recommend this. If I go through this last growing season, I had a bug issue, a disease issue, whatever it was, the first thing I'm going to do in the fall, after frost next week, that bad foliage is getting cleaned up. I'm not leaving it as mulch. I'm not going to let old dead fruit hang on my tree. That's going to affect my plant again next year. And I'm probably going to get a combination dormant spray to make sure I start 2023 clean. The rose, apple, peach tree is a must. There's a lot of plants we can use this on. It's not going to hurt anything. But in all my years of doing this, I think these are the two best around. There's a lot of dormant options, but I found these two the last about 10 years now. I can put these into the same bottle. I don't have to do it twice that way. I love saving time. This is totally organic. It's called horticultural oil. This is my bug end. When I spray this on a plant, you know, if I spray this on my arm, what's that oil do? It runs, it coats, it covers everything. I cut off oxygen between air, bug, larva, issue on the branch, and I'm going to start clean, right? The copper is the way to go for a natural fungicide. They can't call this organic, it doesn't have carbon, but a natural fungicide like Liquid Cop is going to, again, cling to the wood on my tree and almost act like a shield. So the problem with disease is wind and rain. Think of the last 2 days. So what blows around in that wind are fungus spores. So if I have a clean tree, that spore comes down next spring and gets onto my new plant, I'm going to have scab again. I'm going to have black spot again on my rose. And whatever the problem is going to start over again right away. That copper is a little different complex than most, so it's got about 30 days of shield. So if I can get on even like in the one time in the winter, and then I let my peach tree bloom in spring, and I get it on there again, maybe in one more month. Then once we dry out, I can walk away from it a little bit. Okay, is that making sense? But if I use that, that covers everything, and I've got that shield on my bud. So when that spore blows in and tries to infect my plant, that copper is going to act like a nice barrier to keep that to a minimum. Okay, so if you need it, it's a great price at 20% off. I'll probably do it again for the fruit stuff in the spring. We'll have the classes up for next year here pretty quick for January. But we will do that again for spring. But this one to me, again, I'm not running home and doing this anytime soon. This would be something I look to do in my yard in February. You know, I'm going to wait till the tail end of winter and go, okay, what did I have problems with last year? What can I do a little extra protection on? And then boom, I'm ready to go for the gardening season. Okay.
Do you think it would work on Myers lemon tree that has
scale?
Fungus. Wow.
Powdery mildew. Oh, you got city mold. So city mold is coming from a bug. So you got to get the bug and the disease out of there. So you probably would get. I've got some. I can show you after class. We got some different stuff in the store. We can show you that would do great with the citrus. Yeah, that's a pretty easy one.
Powdery mildew.
Yep. Copper is a great mildew cure. There's a lot of things we can use for mildew, but again, if I had mildew on the, are you talking a rose or would you? Yeah. So the biggest thing for you with the rose is. Not now necessarily, but that President's Weekend, mid-February, I don't want anything left on that plant. You may look at it with a naked eye and go, wow, what is he telling me to do? It looks like I got brand new glossy green leaves. That is where it starts for the season. So I got to cut it back, no leaves left at all, period. I don't want anything left on, and we start fresh. Because then I can feed it, apply, you know, a systemic or whatever your thing is to try to control the rose issues. And then off we go for the season. And now I can go, you know, something natural like neem oil or a different product with the rose, and I don't have to go chemical and keep that mildew away. Yeah, the problem with, I'm not picking on roses because I love them. I got a bunch in my yard, but that is the single biggest issue around here is the rose. Because if you leave your old stuff on, I guarantee you're going to have the same issue you had before, and that includes stuff left at the base. And B, you're not going to change the weather around here, and as long as it's wet in that this year was brutal, long. Typically by May, you know, we can kind of say, sweet, we're off for the season. But if it's wet, that's what's breeding it. And I have to have any disease. If I have a leaf out and I'm a little happy fungus spore and I hit that foliage, if that foliage is dry, I can't propagate. If it's wet and I sit there for about 3-4 hours on most fungal issues, now I have a chance to take a foothold, and off we go for the season. That may help you a little bit too, okay? Okay, so dormant spray is the last one. So we got 20% off tools, 20% off the dormant spray. Hopefully you'll do a little shopping. Like I said, I think it's a cool gift for gardeners, man. I used to give most of my family's gotten little hand pruners and cool tools over the years. Like, ooh, listen to my sock, I got a hori knife. You know, there's always some fun gardening stuff for good gardeners for gifts. This is yesterday we lost power, so we were supposed to have evergreen perennials yesterday. I'll talk about it Monday with our marketing lady. I may end up doing this next Saturday, or I may record something and post it. Today is the official last class of the year, so I'll say thanks for joining us on the internet. I record these, so the internet, thanks for jumping on and watching every time. You know, I think we'll probably end up figuring out a way to still do that one last class, but we stop here for wreath making, so just a couple weeks away. This is Christmas land. You know, we have folks come in and make their custom wreaths in here. It's a great idea. If you haven't tried it before, it's really fun. Come in with some friends, co-workers, and set up a little wreath time. We make reservations so you can kind of have it on your own, you know, for an hour and a half. Some people probably bring in things they're not supposed to bring in, and snacks and things too, but I won't say anything. You just keep it in the Starbucks cup, right? So wreath making starting up here, and then we'll be back. I mean, literally just on Friday, the marketing director and I sit once a year in the fall and set up 2023. So we will be back like always in January, recording them. We'll be doing live. Hopefully we go back to the way it was. If you've been down here for years, this is typically a class. There'd be 100, 150 people packed in here. Our classes are usually well attended live, but the pandemic kind of changed everything. So now we record. You got some other options to kind of sit in the pajamas and watch it at home if you want to, so, which is a good thing. It's a good thing for that. Okay, so like I mentioned earlier, appreciate the Everett Clinic, you know, sponsoring our classes. They do this once a month, so I gotta find them here. Hold on, I got them right over here. But I got 5 $50 gift cards, and please nobody get mad at me if I don't pick you. When I ask questions and the first hand I see go up, if you get the right answer, I'm gonna grab you one of these 5 $50 gift cards thanks to Everett Clinic. So I wish I could do 5, 10, 12 of them, and everybody could have one, but we'll hit them up next year for some more. So let's just try. I got 5 of them written down there, and hopefully they're not too bad. It was tough coming up with some questions for this pruning one, to be honest with you. So we got, you don't have to give me a definition, but what does it mean when I talk about thinning? Thinning cuts. There's her hand.
Air through, letting air.
All right, I like that. You're thinning out the center. Here's number 1. Don't spend it all in one place. Oh wait, you have to, because it's all for Sunnyside. Okay, on the other end of that, what does heading back mean? There we go.
Cutting the tops off.
There you go. Changing the direction. You got winner number 2 here. If I didn't lock myself in here, I'd bring it to you. All right. Number 3. Ooh, I said this one like 5 times. So hopefully someone will get it. When do I give my hydrangea its final prune? There you go. All right. That's close.
Just do the heads now.
There you go. Exactly. Deadhead the blooms now. How about, ooh, this one might be a tough one. I brought up a few, but give me an example of an old wood blooming plant. First one up.
Old hydrangea.
There you go. Old school hydrangea is most acceptable. I'll take that. Could have been rhodey, lilac. We probably mentioned about 80 of them here today. All right, and you can pick whichever one, because I call them my rules. But what's my number 1 rule for pruning? He listened. All right, that's the rule I hope everybody takes home. Again, I appreciate y'all coming in here today. You know, this is a fun class, because I usually, when we had live, we had all kinds of people chuckling, because usually the husband and the wife are sitting together, and she's like, I told you, what are you doing, butchering my shrimp? The husband's like, wait a minute, I didn't do it that way. And it's usually a really fun one, because for some reason, you know, pruning really freaks people out. You can't, you know, if you paid attention to the evergreen part of this, not cutting to bare wood, okay? You can play a mad scientist and probably explain, you know, and try anything you want besides that. You're gonna find out, oh, that is not what I wanted to do. Plants are resilient, they'll regrow. But just don't cut those evergreen things back too far. You're going to be disappointed. My neighbor got his boxwood last year, and I was like, oh, you're not going to be happy with that. And a year and a half later, guess what it still is? Dead brown wood with green all the way around it because he went just a little bit too far into the face. So keep that in mind. Other than that, you really can't go wrong. I mean, if you kind of remember those rules, you know, prune after bloom, I think is a great one to remember because it just is like, oh, sweet, I enjoyed all my flowers. You get your prune for the year. I'm done. And I don't have to see you again until next year. You know, I had a rule in my yard. I break it with dahlias and a few things, but if I have to touch you more than twice a year, you're out of here. I got something else I'll replace you with. So that was my own little thing to kind of save some time. And I got some cool plants, but there's a lot of plants, reliable stuff around here. You really should not have to do more than just that one quick little touch up a season. Okay. So thanks for coming. Again, I appreciate you coming to the Sunnyside stuff again, 2022, and we'll see you in 2023. Right? All right.